Hello, this is Derek from FS Pro with part 1 of a review of the JAR Design's Airbus A330. So my intention today in part 1 of this review is to look only at the external representation of the aircraft. That's it. In later reviews I'll be taking a look at the internal graphics, the MCDU, the flight characteristics, documentation, and so on. So this will be a review made up of multiple parts so that you can select just the bits that you want to see that's important to you, or if you want the whole thing, then there's a whole series of videos you can watch to give as in-depth and complete a review as I can provide for this particular aircraft. Okay, so here it is, parked on the ground with the head-on straight forward view. What we can see at the moment is that the ailerons, both in the down position, that's appropriate, and also the elevators here. The aircraft isn't powered up, it's cold and dark, there's no hydraulics in the system, and as I understand it, this is the default resting position for those surfaces when no hydraulics are available. Let's take a look at the side view. And what I'm looking for here more than anything really is proportion. I don't know if you have seen some images of simulation aircraft. One area where the proportion can be a little bit off, I think, is here around the cockpit area, where the size of the cockpit windows and so on seem disproportionately large compared with the rest of the aircraft. But here, looking at the proportions generally from the cockpit backwards, everything looks okay. And I think the look of the thing is appropriate here. If something looks off, generally you're going to see it, and you're going to see it fairly quickly. But here, everything seems to be about right. Let's take a look at the straightforward tail view. If I can get it to come up. Again, I'm seeing pretty much what I'd expect to see. You can see almost a gentle curve of the wings. I would expect to be able to see that even though we're on the ground. Everything else, yep, pretty much as one might expect really. Let's take a final look on the port side of the aircraft. Again, nothing stands out here, nothing remarkable out here. Pretty much what I would expect to see. Let's take a closer look at some elements of the aircraft now. Let's go look first of all at the front wheel, I think. So here we are looking at the nose wheel. I've used the standard livery that's provided with JAR Design. There are many others that are available, not from JAR Design, but from individual developers who've created liveries for the aircraft. But for review purposes, I'm sticking with the default livery that's provided so that I can give a fair comparison for what you would get, or a fair review for what you would get out of the box. So looking here at the nose wheel, the modelling we can see here, I think, is quite fantastic. We'll take a look at this again a little later with a nighttime perspective with a light so you can see what that looks like too. But for the here and now, I think the modelling here is certainly praiseworthy. I think they've done a remarkably good job. So, yep, I'm liking that. One thing I'm starting to notice though are these rivet lines here, which seems, I don't know, they seem to me to be a bit too pronounced, but more on this later. Let's change our view and go up to the front right passenger door. So the first thing I can see here again is this very pronounced set of riveting marks here around the door. it seems to be overdone to me. I've taken a look at pictures of the A330, anything I could find, the higher resolution the better. And although this area is certainly visible on real-world aircraft, it doesn't seem to be anywhere near this pronounced. Next thing I notice is that we've got pretty poor anti-aliasing here around the door. The jaggies, as I sometimes call them. This is indicative of generally poor anti-aliasing setup. Now on the topic of that, let's take a quick look at the rendering options that I've got set at the moment. I've got HDR rendering on. The HDR anti-aliasing I've got selected is 2 times SSAA and FXAA. It's by no means the highest setting. So let's put it back to let's put it onto the highest quality. Take a look at the aircraft again. I'll need to revert back in a moment because the reason I've got it set to 2 times is so that I can maintain a decent frames per second speed. Now as you can see at the moment I'm only achieving something like 2-3 frames per second. In fact it's dropping. No more than 2 frames per second, but still the jaggies around the door here are really pronounced. So that's a bit of a letdown really for the modelling. Let's put the setting back to what it was so we can get some speed back. As you can see, when the frame rate has dropped, everything in the simulation slows down markedly. Okay, back to 2 times. I'm back up to around 30 frames per second now. That's better. No noticeable change on the jaggies around the door here, as you can see. Okay, let's open the door and see what we can see. So the first thing I'd say is this menu system that's available for the A330 for opening doors is a bit clunky really. I think they could do more to improve this area, and I wouldn't be surprised if there was a change coming to this soon. I'm told that the menu system for the JARDesign A320 is much better than it is here for the A330. So as I say, I wouldn't be surprised to see a change coming. Let's try opening this door first. And it's lovely to see that the action here is modelled. So the lifting of the lever for the door opening is accurately modelled. Also nice to see when the door opens is here. There seem to be the hydraulic door opening devices, whatever they're called in real life, I don't know. We'll be able to get a better view if I open the other door. So let's do that. So open the front passenger door left, and you can see there that X section drops down, and these are the bars that I was noticing over here as the door opens up, and then the bar here as well. That's all part of the door opening mechanism. So really nicely modelled. I'm liking that, and I don't know if it's this door being opened and the rather odd shadow effect I'm getting here, but again the rivets here look hugely pronounced. They look like something you might expect to see on a 1914 battleship or cruiser or something, but not something you'd expect to see on an aircraft built in the 1980s or 1990s. Okay, let's take a look at the front cargo door now. So one thing I'd point out is that everywhere where you can see labels that have writing on them, the writing seems to be in really excellent detail. Even if it's small like this, if you want to, you can zoom right in and see what the text is on these labeling. That's quite remarkably good. What I'm going to do is open up the door here, the front cargo door, so we can take a look at the modelling for that. Again, you can see the lifting of the flap, the lowering of the lever, it's all modelled. And here as the door comes open, you can see again that the modelling of the door, the thickness of it, the catches, the locks are all really nicely modelled. Impressive stuff, and that's really good to see. Okay, let's go and take a look at the starboard spoilers now. So what I want to do here is to activate the spoilers so that we can see again how they're modelled and what this will look like. Just before I do, again, I'm gonna have to comment on these rivet lines here, or whatever they are. Very heavily pronounced. And when you compare it with something like the engine down here, where some of the modelling, like here for example, the lines on the engine, or the labelling, or the lettering, which is exquisitely well done. This seems to have been applied by, I don't know, well, let's say that the lettering and the modelling perhaps on the engine has been exquisitely done, it's been gently done, it's been deftly done, and by comparison the rivet lines and so on here on the wing seem to have been laid on by, I don't know, Thor and a heavy hammer or something. It's so markedly different, one bit of representation from the other, and it's a shame, for me at least. I think this heavy-handedness in the textures spoils the effect somewhat. Anyway, before I can activate the spoilers and to show you what happens here, I need to pop into the cockpit and activate the hydraulic circuit. So let's do that. So before I can activate the circuits, I will need to put the batteries on. And I'll fire up the APU. I'll wait for that to come online, and then what I'm going to do is to fire up some of the electrical hydraulic circuits to save me starting up the engines. So I can hear the engine, or the APU, pardon me, firing up in the background. Should become available shortly. There we are. And with that done, up here to the hydraulics, I'll turn on the hydraulics for all three circuits. Okay, with that done, let's pop back outside to the spoiler view. So what I'm going to do is to set flaps 1, which will also activate the first stage of spoilers.
Flaps 1.
Now you can see that the front spoilers still continue moving after the sound of the hydraulics have finished. The hydraulics, or the sound of the hydraulics, seems to be allied to the animation for the lowering of the flaps and completely separate from the activation of the spoilers. Let's set the next level of flaps.
Flaps 2.
And you can see same effect again. And for flaps 3.
Flaps 3.
And that's as far as the spoilers go. I'll set flaps 4 now because we'll take a look at the flaps in a short while. But as you can see, this has no effect on the spoilers at all. Okay, so while we're up here, we can take a look across the wing surface, which looks reasonably modelled, but again, these rivet lines just not doing it for me, and they seem to get even worse here. So, okay, let's move on to the next bit. Let's take a look at the starboard wing route, in fact, and take a closer look at some of this riveting and modelling. So you can see it there on the spoiler, and you can see it here. Now what seems to have happened, as near as I can make out, is that this rivet line has simply been stretched around the wing route, and it's been stretched and tortured beyond the limits of its endurance until we've got this really odd and horrible, clearly overworked and overused set of rivet lines. I've no doubt that drawing this independently or modelling it more accurately is difficult to do. And yet in an aircraft where so much effort has clearly been expended in some areas, this, well, it really does spoil the whole thing, and yet I can't imagine that it's that much more difficult to do when the look of it has, for me at least, such a detrimental effect on the whole of the exterior of the aircraft. Okay, moving on, let's take a look at the starboard engine. Now the outside of the engine I described as looking really rather excellent, but as you saw there in the fly past, the engine cowling itself is very clearly made up of a large number of straight lines. So clearly it's not a circle, it's not modelled as a circle, it's modelled as a whole bunch of straight lines. I'm guessing that there's a very good reason for this in terms of modelling and frame rates and speed and so on and so forth, but I guess I'm surprised that it's as marked as it is. I would hope to see it to be somewhat circular. By contrast, looking here at the fans and the graphic here at the front of the fan blades, I think that's modelled remarkably well and looks excellent. So, not sure about the cowling, not sure that quite does it for me. Let's take a look at the starboard main wheel now. I'm probably going to get some graphic clipping here, in fact I'm sure we will. So the modelling here on the wheel, I think, is just awesome. A great job done here, from the textures that are applied on the wheel hubs, through the tyre, through the modelling of all the individual pistons that operate for the brakes, for the wheels, the whole setup of all the great mechanical and metal pieces that make up the main undercarriage of such a large, heavy aircraft, down to each of the individual hydraulic lines that actuate the calipers and the brakes and everything that goes along with it. I think that's a great piece of graphical work and a lovely piece of modelling. Really nicely done. Coming to the inside of the wheel, there's no lowering of quality here at all. It really is a lovely piece of work. It's only when you get right into the wheel well, right up there, where the wheel itself joins what would be the internal operation of the wing, that you can see that not everything has been modelled, but still what you can see, the bit that's on show, is, to my mind, a really lovely piece of work. Okay, let's take a look at the flaps now. So I extended the flaps earlier, as you can see. They're currently at their fullest extent, and so the modelling at the edge here, I think that's just an applied texture. It's not actually modelled as metal with pressings inside of it, it's just a texture overlaid over the edge of the flaps. What else can we see? Actually, let's try and raise the spoilers here. There we go. And that gives us a good look into the activating mechanisms here for the spoilers. So again, nicely modelled. That stuff that I'm pointing at here now, I'm sure again that's textures applied, but these parts here seem to be individual activated components for the flaps. So again, that's a lovely piece of modelling, really nicely done. Note that with the flaps down, the resting position for the aileron on this wing is also in a slightly downward position. Let's raise the flaps a notch.
Flaps 3.
As I said, the sound of the hydraulics is synchronized with the animation of the flaps. You might have noticed there that the aileron came up slightly as the flaps did. Let's go up another stage of flaps.
Flaps 2.
And another.
Flaps 1.
And let's retract them
0.
completely. So now we can see that the aileron is fully flush, as are the flaps, with the rest of the wing. Whilst we're here, I'll do a quick check on the ailerons. So left aileron, what happens is on the right wing, the aileron is lowered and back to level. And now if I do a right turn, you can see that not only does the aileron on the right wing raise, but so in fact do the spoilers. So left, we just have the aileron lowered, and for right we get the aileron and the spoilers raised. Okay, let's have a look at another part of the aircraft now. Let's move toward the rear cargo hold. So looking inside the cargo hold here, for me it's a bit reminiscent of the original version of Doom. The textures, the modelling in here, it all looks very similar to me. Now, if you've ever played Doom, you'll know exactly what I mean. If you haven't and you're too young to remember that kind of nonsense, apologies in advance. I'm going to open this cargo door while we're here on the inside. Aft cargo door, I think. Yes, there we go. Again, you can see a lovely piece of modelling here on the door. It's all accurately modelled and reflected and done. A really nice job. What's next? The rear cargo hold. Now, believe it or not, this here is called the bulk cargo door. I'm not entirely sure why. Smallest door, and it's a very small section. But let's open that up anyway. If you know why it's the bulk cargo door, why it's called that, please leave me a note in the comments below. I'd love to learn a bit more about that. Anyway, there we go again. Nicely animated, nicely modelled. Finally, let's move up toward the APU, located at the rear of the aircraft, of course, and that also gives us a view of the nicely modelled rear elevator section of the aircraft. So again, I'll activate the elevators, and as we can see, back on the stick we'll raise them, forward on the stick we'll lower them, everything much as you would expect. There is one little idiosyncrasy here though. What I'm going to do now is to activate the rudders. If a full left rudder, you can see how the lettering kind of wraps around here on the inside of the rudder, which is interesting. But actually, even more interesting is an odd artifact here at the top of the tail. You might notice, if the YouTube compression hasn't made it too small, that there's an aerial here coming out from the reverse of the rudder. And if I move the rudder, that thing still stays there. I wonder if we can zoom in on that a bit and take a look at that in a bit more detail. Forgive me as I mess around here to try and get us a bit closer to the effect. I'm not sure I've made it more difficult to see there. There we are, it's a bit easier to see, isn't it? So, there we are. So the rudder turns, but the whatever that is, that it stays absolutely still, not connected to anything whatsoever. It's an easy thing to miss when you're modelling an aircraft of this complexity, I'm sure. It gives me a smile. It's certainly nothing that I would be unduly concerned about. Okay, let's take a look at some more external shots of the aircraft. Here it is with those doors open. Overall, I have to say, I think the external shots of this aircraft are pretty good. Pretty good indeed. There we go. So for more on the outside, let's take a look at some of the plugins that come with the A330. So for ground equipment, let's get it all called up. Now I don't know if you noticed that, but when I did the ground equipment call, something seemed to happen. It flashed and then it disappeared, as if the ground equipment was there then immediately disappeared. This was particularly vexing for me for a period of time until I figured out the reason why and why it does this. To get the answer, we need to pop into the cockpit, and whilst in here you need to ensure that the parking brake is set to on. Otherwise you won't be able to get the external ground equipment to actually show. So with that done, back down to the A330, ground equipment call, and now here it all is. Just going to change the setting on real terra haze so those lights aren't quite as pronounced as they currently are. There we go. So you notice we have a well modelled fuel bus, we have a couple of catering buses, and over on the other side we have a couple of step vehicles as well. Now these come with the JAR Design A330 by default. Nothing extra to pay here, is part and parcel of the service, as indeed is the ground power units that you can see down here that I called up earlier. Now the odd thing is that when you bring these vehicles out, bring the catering trucks up for example, what it does is it automatically opens the door, as you can see at the back. But then if you've already got the door open, it gets confused and it will close it. So it seems behind the scenes that there is a toggle switch of some form for these doors, and all it does is operate the toggle, and it's not actually sure whether the door is open or closed. Back into the menu, let's open the door for the front passenger door right for the catering truck. There we go. Let's take a look on the other side of the aircraft for the passenger doors. They're good. We don't want that front one open though by the cockpit because there are no stairs there, so let's close that one. There we go. Okay, with that done, I'm going to move us forward in time so we can get a night time look at the aircraft. So this is just one of the features, standard features in X-Plane that enables us to do this. So you can see that with all that done, we can see the red lights of the catering truck over here, the rotating lights on the trucks as well, and the lights for the cabin are on inside the aircraft, but that's it. Let's pop in to the cockpit and set on some of the external lights. Okay, let's put us back into daylight mode. Just pop into the cockpit, set the relevant lights back to where they were. So having done that, I'll now dismiss the ground equipment. Close all of the doors. And that concludes the external review of the JAR Design A330. I think if I were to summarise it, I'd say that the majority of the modelling really is of superb detail. There's so much to like and admire here in everything that you can see. And yet, there's just some elements of it that really spoil it for me. Predominantly, it's the rather heavy-handed application of the rivet lines on the aircraft more than anything that detract from it. Other things that detract from it a little, the squaring around the engine cowling, for example. You know, I would hope for that to be much more round than it currently is. But other than that, I mean, let's not detract from this. Overall, I think the external modelling really is very good. The graphics are good. The textures are good. A really good job's been done here. If I was scoring this out of 5 stars, I'd have to give it 4 out of 5. And it wouldn't take much effort, I think, to give it a 5 out of 5. So, well done on this one, I think, JAR Design. Why not join me next time when I'll take a look at the internal graphics and textures for the JARDesign A330. This is Derek at FS Pro. Thanks again for watching.